Is it like tens of millions? Is it hundreds of millions? What are we talking about?
It's billions of dollars.
Okay, billions.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean,
with a
I
B.
think we've thrown around numbers like $5 billion a year in government spending, but again, it's sort of hard to know what entirely that encompasses. Is that just the state of Massachusetts? Is that does that include whatever Barnstable is spending on road salt? You know,
Right.
I mean, it's just hard to know exactly. But yeah, it's several $billion, probably not double-digit billions, but billions of dollars a year.
Okay. So the bulk of that money, is it being spent on a particular thing in a particular industry, or have you delved into a particular industry thus far?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest numbers obviously are in construction. They call it vertical and horizontal. Vertical and horizontal. Vertical. Wait.
Horizontal.
Horizontal and vertical construction.
Horizon.
Right. Roads, bridges, buildings. But it comes all the way down that to putting a roof on the senior center. Right. You were finding dudes redoing the playground surfacing. There literally is office paper and staples and stuff like that.
Okay.
So start with the big stuff. Obviously, what you're looking at is anybody you see in the street with a big yellow truck with their name on it, with a bucket of people hanging over a building with cranes. Right. That's the big stuff.
Yeah.
But the little stuff adds up to a lot too.
All right.
I think this boils down to the fact that there's a ton of public money being spent. This is taxpayer money, and we get in. This is really a version of affirmative action. So you think of affirmative action being around hiring and maybe school admissions and this sort of thing, that there really is not an even playing ground. So there's this massive amount of public money being spent, and then you have to look at, well, who are the businesses out there that are available to do the work? And many, if not most of the states in the country have some sort of affirmative market program to say, there's disparities going on, there's a lot of discrimination going on, how should we try to make up for that? And so they set these policies to say certain percentages of minority or women-owned businesses should be given some, tip the scale a little bit in their favor to create some sense of equity.
Is that happening here?
The policies, the laws are in place. It's just that when you go to look at the reality of it, it's not really looking that great. You're seeing very small percentages, particularly of black-owned businesses, getting any share of this public spending.
Okay, and that's the subject. So the sort of first story that you put together for this series. Give me the thesis of that. What did we look into initially?
Well, let me take it back to sort of how we got to this part.
Yeah, why?
I think it makes sense in that sort of context. I'm a bit of an idiot, and I don't know Massachusetts. I'm new here. I came 2 years ago, and so I showed up and didn't know anything. So I sort of went back to my safety zone, which is looking at government documents, because that's what I used to do for fun in Washington. Right?
Yeah, barrel of laughs.
Oh, you never know, man. There's all kinds of cool stuff. And I found this database of government documents where the state announces stuff, where they announce that they have new regulations for healthcare, or they announce that they have a new contract for paving the road in front of the library. And it was all behind a paywall. That is, they were charging money to read these documents.
How much?
$150 a year for the regulatory half, and another $150 a year for the contract half.
So $300 a year just to see their public announcements.
Yes, my head blew off.
You said you came from elsewhere. You were in Washington. Did that strike you as atypical?
Borderline criminal. Yeah. I mean, now in the days when you would get these documents mailed to you in a book form on a regular basis, then you'd pay the postage and the printing, right? That made some sense. But this stuff, it's online now. It's all, it's the internet's, it's free, right?
Yep. Yeah.
No, they're still making a buck off it. So I sort of was like, well, that can't be right.
Yeah.
So I got a subscription and started playing around in there, and I hired a bunch of students to scrape it all.
Okay. And what did you learn?
Well, so we said, well, look, there's 13. We had 35,000 contract announcements or something like that, and we matched them up to the award. We found 13,000 contracts that were announced in there. Like, okay, so what does that tell us?
Yeah.
Well, not much. We said, well, let's compare it to, I don't know, minority contractors, because they have a list in the state of certified minority contractors. You go through a paperwork process, you get a little check mark that says, yes, you are.
You can work for the state, and you're a minority contractor kind of thing?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, you count against their benchmark goals because they have hired a minority contractor, because you have that little check mark on your piece of paper. So we're like, all right, well, let's mash these things up. We got 13,000 contracts. Let's see how many of them went to minority contractors, and the answer was 250. out of 13,000 over a 10-year period, state and local contracts.
That's low.
That was what we said. That was basically the result. So that's low.
Yeah.
And that's where we started. All right, 13,000 contracts, 250 for minorities, that's low.
And at first, were you like, that can't be right?
Yes.
Let's double check this.
Yes.
Like, so that's why it's like a flag, a little tuning fork goes off, and you say, something's going on here. Let's figure this out.
And it was designed really partly as a project for the students. Like they were a class of computer science students who wanted to find ways to use their skills to inform journalism. So let's try this, right?
Yeah.
So once they came back to me with these numbers, we all looked at each other. It's like, I don't know. That sounds like news. The problem being, of course, that one, I'm an idiot, so I don't really understand what all these contracts represent. I don't understand the pool of contracts we're looking at. There's a whole bunch of other questions like, is this really telling us what we think it's telling us?
Yeah.
And at that point, I drafted Burrell. I was like,
So you come to the table and are what, less of an idiot than he is? Is that the is that the team
he knows more
effort
about how
here?
it works around here, yeah.
So when you came to the table, what did you see and where did you take it?
Yeah, again, I wanted to understand, well, who's affected by this, right? I mean, again, because you're looking, particularly with the work we do in radio, I mean, or any kind of journalism, really want to see what does it really mean to people out there in the real world. And, it seemed to me that the people most affected by this would be entrepreneurs, particularly entrepreneurs of color, Black, Latino, Asian, people trying to survive and run a business. So in some ways, those people are listed. If they're certified, they're on a state list. One of the first things we found is that these people are extremely reticent to talk because they are scared. If 50% of your income relies on a state or a local government saying, yeah, we'll buy the paper product from you, we will hire you to repair the sidewalk or something like this, you are extremely fearful of antagonizing or saying anything that might disparage that employer in a contractual relationship. So I heard these people speak. I've met with a lot of these people, but they are extremely fearful of speaking on the record, using their name, and running the risk of their livelihood. And who could blame them for that feeling? But it's also kind of scary or sad to think that there's this chilling effect in this is a marketplace driven by public dollars, right? And so you have people who are dependent on trying to get some of this work, and they are plain scared of saying anything critical. They're not necessarily bad-mouthing somebody. They just might be saying like, whoa, this system is hard, this system feels discriminatory. Maybe they actually hear something racist said in an office building or something like this where they're trying to get work. And some of that stuff is documented through state documents. So I wanted to understand historically, what has the state said they want to do and what are they actually doing? We often run into this thing, what's the gap between a promise of a policy or a law and what does it look like on the ground?
Okay, so
Let me interrupt for a second. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that one of the things, when you say 250 contracts out of 13,000 is not a lot. Like it's,
no, it sounds ridiculous.
And one of the things you learn in investigative journalism pretty quickly is that any single number is irrelevant.
Yeah.
What you need is to see numbers over time, is to see change in numbers, is to see where this has gone. And so what Chris had done, or has done, and was doing for 6 months, is he dug up the government documents going back 20 and 30 years, showing where we were 20 years ago and comparing that to where we are now. And that's where he found out, that the dollar value of contracts to minority business had declined over 20 years, despite all these government policies in between to try and say, oh, we're doing more minority businesses. That fact, that single fact, that the value of contracts to minority businesses in Massachusetts declined by like 24%, I think it was, adjusted for inflation.
Yep.
That alone was the thing that drove the series, is that it's actually gotten worse.
Right. And so the fact is the state has changed the names of of the agency that's supposed to be overseeing this. So typically, we're lucky to find a lot of documents and information online. Turns out that the reports from the state that go back 20 years are no longer online. These reports exist in paper documents. They happen to exist after some prodding of librarians at the State House Library. I was able to find these documents, and I'm reading them and seeing, just as Singer was saying, wait a second, I see this dollar amount, some
Yeah.
hundreds of millions of dollars being spent specifically for minority businesses from the state's discretionary budget, and then go forward 20 years, compare those two numbers, the numbers have gone down significantly, right? So there's that. The other piece that was coming up was I started to seek out former employees of the state, people who had worked specifically in this realm to help with diversity hiring within some of the states, statewide and within some of the state's biggest agencies. And I kept communicating back to my editor, to Singer, over the course of the reporting is, I'm hearing, they are absolutely saying this is a problem. They're saying there's not enough enforcement, there's not enough of a priority and an imperative being put behind this issue. And so it just kept adding that sense that we're actually working on something really important here.
I am talking with Paul Singer and Chris Burrell, part of the investigative team at WGBH News, about their recent series, The Color of Public Money. If you're watching on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Twitch, and you have some questions or want to share an experience in this topic, please do so. We have a couple questions from the audience that I'm going to go to right now. How does the public bidding process work? Very basic question, a very good question. I suppose if we're trying to understand why there's this disparity, we got to understand how the bidding process works. How does it work?
Well, that's part of the problem that we have found, is that it's very hard to keep track of. Again, for starters, I had to subscribe to this thing for $1,500,
Right.
For $150 a year to get the bids, but they show up other places. So the short version. Mayor Burrell agrees with City Council that they need to repave the sidewalk out here, right? In theory, the city's procurement office puts out what's called an RFP, a request for proposals. They say, we need to pave the sidewalk in front of the Boston Public Library, and we're asking for bids. And any company can come and say, yes, I have the skills, yes, I have the abilities, and here is my price. And it's supposed to be a sealed, more or less secret process where those bids all stay under seal until the time that they say their date is, whatever their effective date, or whatever their deadline date is. At that point, they open all the bids, review them, choose the best bid, and it's almost always going to be the lowest cost bid unless there's some other
Factor at
play. At that point, they're supposed to announce that this is the Herwick company has won the award to pave the sidewalk. That's sort of an overview of how this works.
Okay.
The problem is that, for starters, it doesn't always work exactly that way. There's different marketplaces within the state. There's actually this thing, I don't want to get into too much weedy detail, but you can go to a thing called combis, which is the state has a marketplace, basically, where they have these sort of contracts that they've already signed with thousands of contractors for all kinds of stuff. Private detective services, because the state, of course, chases people around to make sure they're not lying on their disability checks. So they have a list of private detectives, and the contract is up there. They've got, again, staples, paper, water, whatever. You have to sort of know where to go and how to get into these systems.
Right. There's a high barrier to entry, in other words, right?
Knowledge entry is the first problem.
Yeah.
Knowing how to be in the stream of where to find the contract announcements. I mean, now I've got a subscription on my computer, so it pops up every couple of weeks, but not everybody does.
Okay. All right. Another question. Why does this situation exist? Just outright racism?
Well, some of that's been, this is an issue that most people don't walk around thinking about. And honestly, if you're if you're a contractor and you're trying to get business with the government, you're probably thinking about it. And if you are a contractor or a business owner who, again, happens to be a minority, you're probably thinking about it in this context of, wait, I keep trying to get these bids and I see this works out there and I know I could do it and I know it would help my business and maybe feed my family and do something and build wealth, and I can't get these contracts. I cannot get this work, and it's this extremely frustrating experience. So in order for an entity, a government entity, to create any kind of policy that, again, create kind of an affirmative action landscape around this, they have to study the problem. So those are called disparity studies. They have to look at, well, who's available to do this work? What are they, how many minorities are there, this sort of thing, and then study how many of them are being used, how many of these people are being hired. And these studies cost the state $1 million.
Yep.
They go on for 400 pages, and they also do narrative-specific interviews with the business owners. And they find, shocking, it's a discriminatory marketplace.
Yeah.
It's not a fair marketplace for people trying to make a go of it here. So they're running into just outright racism, yes, and they're running into discriminatory practices like, what do you have to do to get through through this bidding process to prove that you're able to do this work? This has just been documented, again, not just in Massachusetts, but in cities and states across the country.
All right. I'm going to play a clip from one of these radio stories right now. This is James Jennings. He's an expert on race and an emeritus professor at Tufts. Now, you said earlier, you sort of said the kind of how does this affect people, and I think this is a little bit addressing this, talking about how MBEs, what are MBEs?
Minority Business Enterprises.
How they can bring back wealth to communities that are hurt by discrimination. Let's hear it.
This is a major resource. If we can bring MBEs to the table in a substantive way, you bring jobs into the community, you have greater levels of disposable income, which then helps the broader economy because you have more consumers spending more money,
Right, and when Boston is struggling with the same problem that we found at the state level, and there was a hearing about this a year ago in the Boston City Council, and part of this conversation with these small businesses saying, well, we could hire people, we could do all this stuff if we could get these contracts.
Yeah.
I mean, and in one case, I think it was a contract for hauling around the city the rolling trash bins. Right?
Okay.
They were delivering the rolling trash bins to people.
Okay.
Because the city gives you a trash bin.
Right.
Someone's going to drive that to your house and drop it off. And one of the businesses said, well, I mean, we couldn't get that contract because we don't have 100 trucks to deliver 10,000 bins.
Yeah.
But we do have 10 trucks, and we could maybe deliver 1,000. If they break it into pieces,
I see.
then we could get that little piece of the contract, and then we could get a little money, make a little money off that, and maybe buy another truck and get a bigger contract next time. Like, that's the whole idea, is can you get some of these smaller businesses without the capital available, get them in the system, get them to develop the capital through their work, and then they can expand and hire more people.
So,
I was
go
gonna
ahead.
say that,
Yeah.
that Jennings, his point, I think, really gets to why does any of this matter?
Yeah.
Why should anybody care about this, right? So if you have communities that, are really struggling with low income or poor access to any kind of, economic chances or opportunity, then how about we look at this issue? I mean, this is, I'm not going to profess to be an expert on civil rights, but if you look at why was Martin Luther King Jr. in Memphis, this had to do with issues around economic justice,
Yeah.
right? And this is why people who are aware of this issue are very, passionate about it, that you're looking at, here is a ton of money flowing out, and there's a minority group of business owners who just cannot get an equitable shot at this stream of taxpayer money that's being used to, again, build buildings, repair structures, and this kind of thing.
So, obviously, as you addressed, there's a number of reasons why this is happening, and yet it sounds like, and from reading your reporting, there certainly is on the state's part at least an expressed interest in sort of doing a better job of this, right? So there's at least the expression of a will to do a better job. Clearly, your reporting is saying is not happening. Are there places where Massachusetts as a state or municipalities throughout the state can look to who have sort of addressed this in a better way? Are there places where they can look for examples of here's how you really start to attack the problem?
Well, I'll start with where we went, or I went, in early December. We had heard from some of the activists. People were very concerned about the issue in Boston. We're pointing to other cities, largely, not specifically states. One of the cities they were pointing to was Philadelphia, as a place that, as a government entity that was really looking at this problem and saying, how can we do this better? And I did some research on it, looked at some of their reports, talked with them on the phone before I up and drove my vehicle down to Philadelphia after a snowstorm, and saw, in fact, that they are really taking this problem seriously. Now, one has to understand that they have a different demographic there. They have you know, if you were to compare Philadelphia to Boston, they have slightly higher minority percentages there, but not grossly different from Boston. Higher African American population there, a little bit less Hispanic, Latino, and it's kind of the reverse in Boston. But I sat and met with a number of projects that are happening there and talked to minority business owners about what's happening there. We do have a clip if you wanted to lead into that.
Yeah, let's hear. So this is, who is this that we're talking to?
This, I think, is Cappy Sabir.
Yep, this is, so
Yeah.
who is Cappy
He
Sabir?
turned out to be kind of this is always fun as a reporter when you kind of go out and you've got, I'm going to talk to this person, and then somebody else shows up. So he's basically a business partner with another woman. They run a engineering architecture firm based across the Delaware River in New Jersey. And the entire company's basically black and Latino company. I looked at the website. There's maybe a couple of white faces on their masthead showing who works there. And they had been trying for years to get contracts with the city and just getting nowhere with it. The city recently enacted a tax on sugary beverages, so they have this revenue stream, and the mayor there specifically wanted to fix up parks, playgrounds, libraries in the low-income neighborhoods of Philadelphia. And part of that process was how can we, I mean, very intentional process. They said they wanted to spend a third of the $400 million revenue going to minority businesses to do this work. They really, really wanted to make sure that the people doing this work looked like the people who live in these neighborhoods.
Here's Cappy.
In these poor communities that are mostly minority in the city of Philadelphia. And it makes a lot of sense that if you're going to sit there and have people coming in and working and fixing things and designing things, let them look like them. Now you're giving a level of motivation and pride to the community to see, oh, I can be an architect, I can be an engineer, I can be a contractor.
Yeah, so Cappy Sabir really, that was a great, again, you sit there as a reporter, you're like, oh man, that's a great way that he put that.
Yeah.
Understanding full well, he's a black guy, he's an engineer, and he's going into these neighborhoods to do this, important work. Again, to listen to the community, make this public space that's really important to them. In this case, I met them at a small recreation center and playground in North Philly, and got, again, very clear from them that Philadelphia is doing something extremely different. They're setting extremely high goals.
Yep.
So they hit 23% of their city contracts last year went specifically to minority-owned businesses.
And we also found, every time we went out to talk to people about this subject in Massachusetts, people would say, well, there's the Massport example. There's the Massport example.
Okay, so what is the Massport example?
Right. So the Massport example was basically, as I said, we discussed how the bidding process works. You come in to get a contract from the state agency to build something. And at that point, you once you've won the bid or somewhere in the bidding process, you tell them, oh yeah, well 10% of my subcontractors will be minorities. Massport changed that around and said, no, you're not going to come in and bid on a project and then tell us that you're going to hire minorities. What you're going to do is you're going to come to the table with a minority partner who is part of the design and conception of the project and already has a piece of the ownership of the project. And the difference is that you end up not trusting in a prime contractor that they're going to go out and hire some minority businesses, you spend some of this money. No, Massport is judging the proposals on whether or not there is a minority contractor at the table as a partner.
As part of the proposal.
As part of the proposal.
And that is one of the measures of whether or not, like you were saying before, like when somebody, is bidding on a contract, typically it's going to go to the cheapest one,
Right.
whatever. But in this case, they're saying part of the measure here is who are your subcontractors and are you going to hit these targets?
Or who are your partners, not even subs. Who are your partners in the project? And while we heard a lot about that, and I think they're very committed to that idea, and people kept talking about it as a terrific example of how this can be done right, I also have to say we didn't hear a lot about it being replicated anywhere else yet in the state. It's just, it's a pilot project that appears to have been successful in a couple of places, but it has not, by any stretch of imagination, been instituted broadly and globally. And I think Ken Turner was the guy you talked to at Massport who sort of thought this thing up, right?
Yep.
And I think we have a clip of him as well.
Well, let's hear Ken Turner at Massport.
If you truly want to build experience and capacity, the way you do that is you take a smaller firm and you expose that firm to all of the technical information and experience that they'll need so that the next project that comes along, they'll be able to scale up and do a bigger project.
And that's the idea, is that once you sort of draw them into this as a business partner, maybe a minority partner, minority partner on a big project, then they get enough skill and expertise that they can then bid as the prime by themselves on the next big project.
I mean, the theme here that I'm hearing is that by even starting to move it sounds to me like what I'm hearing is that by moving the needle even a little bit on any of this, there's all kinds of positive downstream effects. You're talking about whether that be in the community, where you hear, people in Philadelphia saying like, hey, it's important for kids in this community to see like somebody who looks like them who's an architect or an engineer. Or you're talking about, hey, somebody gets their foot in the door in this contract process, boom, they're going to be able to scale up. That's success.
That's right. And part of it gets back to this interesting thing, you hire who you know.
Sure.
We all sort of hire who we know, which is part of why this process is so close to minorities, is because by and large it is not minorities making the hiring decisions. But it also is why when minorities get into the door and they get the contract, they hire other minorities. And so there is this kind of stream that once they get into the stream, they can share that wealth amongst their community, much in the way that the largely white community has been sharing that wealth amongst themselves all these years.
Have you talked to or heard from big-time government? Like, has Governor Charlie Baker, have you reached out to him? Has he responded to anything, any of this? Mayor Walsh here in Boston?
We reached out to the state. We went to the state a lot, I would say probably for the last several months, looking for documents through the public records and FOIA process. And, they were by and large following those regulations and providing documents that we requested through state laws.
Can we just say,
Yeah.
they were following those regulations to the letter, to the extent that they could avoid giving us anything they didn't want to give us. But but they gave us the things they had to give us.
Yeah, but in terms of actually having a straight-on conversation and asking some of these questions, we tried basically since August, and it wasn't until January, literally like 4 days before the series came out, that they had a phone conversation with us. So it was not easy to get them to really talk in an open way about this issue. You'll note that every year they come out with a report that says, this is what we've done, and it pretty much looks like they're doing a great job. Part of that reason is that they put a lot of other categories into the pool that they're looking at. So they're not just counting minority businesses, they're counting women-owned businesses, they're counting LGBTQ businesses, they're counting veterans, they're counting disabled. And so the whole thing looks like, we're hitting 28, 30% hiring of these groups, which is not a bad thing,
right.
But it kind of obfuscates, it kind of puts a cloak over, wait, what's really going on with minority businesses here, which is the question we asked.
And we should also point out that the interview we finally got was with the director of this office, not with the governor, not with the governor's direct appointee, with this guy who's been there for 30 years, who knows the thing but backwards and forwards, and he spent 20 minutes on the phone with us. We've been reporting this for literally a year and a half, and that was as much as they were willing to give us.
So if the governor was sitting right here in the chair that I'm in, what would you ask him?
Aside from repaving my street, no. If the governor was sitting here right now, I would say the following things. What do you believe are the next concrete steps you can take with your executive agencies to increase the number of minority contractors who are getting big jobs from the state and local agencies? Name 3 specific steps you can take. Is it more money for the office? Is it move the office into a separate branch with independent enforcement authority? Is it, I don't know, create direct oversight and reporting back to the governor's office? Is it adding to each of their employees a requirement that your employment approval every year, your review, will involve how much you did with minority contracts? I don't know, but can you give me, Governor, 3 things you will do specifically to address this? And I have yet to hear that.
How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I would fall in line with the same thing. I mean, I think that, again, if the policy matches the action, I think that's what we're really getting into with a lot of investigative stories, but any kind of reporting. Does the promise or the policy of a government match what they're actually doing? And this issue starts to go like, well, it really isn't. And, you know, Singer's talking about, will you hold them accountable? You know, I saw actual paper documents from 20 years ago that the state gave a letter grade to every single agency in the state. How are you doing on hiring minority and women-owned businesses for the work that the spending that's coming out of your office? Letter grades. There were a third of them had C's and D's. And that's really saying it seems to me, that's showing we take this issue seriously. We're going to tell the public, the taxpayers and citizenry of Massachusetts, this is how Department of Transportation is doing. This is how the DCR is doing. I'm not seeing that anymore.
Yeah. All right, we're almost out of time, but this is an ongoing series, so what can we look forward to seeing coming out of your unit here? You're still on this story. There's going to be more to come.
Yeah, there's a lot more to come. I mean, first of all, I think you were right to shout out to anybody who's watching or anyone in the audience. I mean, we want to hear from people. We want to hear from people who had this experience. We want to hear from people who've succeeded and people who have not succeeded. We think there's more to tell. This thing has spawned a dozen more story ideas. I mean, my good friend Edgar B. Hurwick III on the Curiosity Desk the other day did a story about the little chips that are embedded.
A-tags, as they're called.
Yeah, they're the little chips that are embedded in the street for anybody who is paving a city street in Boston, and they are tagged with the name of the company that's doing the work, right? I want to see if any of those tags, go back to a minority contractor. I'm guessing the answer is no. But that's the kind of thing where I hadn't thought about that until I saw you sitting at your desk with this, you know, utility tag thing up on your computer. Like, that looks interesting.
Yeah.
I like government documents. So there's a whole slew of these things. By the way, the next state report on how they're doing is supposed to be out in the next couple of days. So that'll be a story just on a tee for us to go look in. Okay, are these numbers real? What's it say?
You say that you want to hear from people. How can they best be in touch with you if they have an experience to share or they have some knowledge on this subject that they want to communicate?
Email is always good, paul_singer@wgbh.org. Also, you can catch me on Twitter. It's easier, Singer News on Twitter, @Singer News on Twitter. It's always a good way to find me.
And my email is Christopher_Burrell@wgbh.org.
All right. Chris Burrell, Paul Singer from WGBH News' investigative unit. Thanks to everybody for hanging out with us here for our lunch hour live at the WGBH studio here in Boston at the Boston Public Library. Thank you to you on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch for being with us. We will be back next week. Have a good one.